You can say goodbye in the hard times to make the feelings last a lifetime, but all the memories never go away. Holding
Good morning. Dr. Bob Ross here, a proud member of this church for all of my time here in San Diego, which was 8 years. I want to acknowledge the family, our hearts, thoughts are all with you. I want to, as being asked to serve as an officiant for this service today, how humbling it was. Thank you, Carolyn. I was somewhat speechless when you called and asked me to consider doing this. I remember sitting in this church and I could count every Sunday, making sure that I would leave this place feeling spiritually enhanced and nourished and fulfilled and encouraged, and stood up under the guise and guidance and stewardship of our great friend, the legend, the icon, our mentor, our spiritual guide, our teacher, Reverend George Walker Smith. And so it's pretty humbling to be asked to do this today, and I share that in the spirit of gratitude and appreciation and humility. With that, it is indeed a memorial service. It is, of course, also a celebration, and I hope we conduct ourselves today in the spirit of celebrating the life of this great man, this extraordinary individual. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for what you have meant to Reverend George Walker Smith, to the family, to this church, to this community. Thank you for taking the time to be here and join in the celebration of his spirit. With that, let me introduce for our invocation the pastor of this extraordinary spiritual institution, Pastor Nathan Bird of Christ United Presbyterian Church, who I just learned this morning is a fellow Philadelphian. So, Pastor Bird.
Let us pray. Eternal God, we bless you for the great company of those who have kept the faith, finished their race, and who now rest from their labor. We praise you for those dear to us, whom we name in our hearts before you. Especially we thank you for the Reverend Dr. George Walker Smith, whom you have now received into your presence. Help us to believe where we have not seen, trusting you to lead us through our years. Bring us at last with all your saints into the joy of your home. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Good reminder to shut those phones down. We had a number of adjournments, legislative adjournments, and thoughtful adjournments in memory of Reverend Dr. George Walker Smith. Time does not permit to read those adjournments word by word, but I just want to share who those adjournments came from. The first is from the United States Congress, introduced by Congressmember Susan Davis. From the California State Senate, introduced by State Senator Pro Tem Tony Atkins. From the California State Assembly, introduced by California State Assembly member Shirley Weber. From the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, introduced by County Board of Supervisor Nathan Fletcher. From the San Diego City Council, introduced by City Council member Monica Montgomery. And from the San Diego Unified School District, introduced by Board Trustee and President Dr. Sharon Whitehurst Payne. And I also like to ask all elected officials and elected representatives to please stand for a moment. Thank you for your leadership. With that, we will hear a scripture from the Old Testament from Dolores McNeely.
Good morning. I will be reading Psalms 23 from the Old Testament in honor of Reverend George Walker Smith. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Holy wisdom, holy word, rest in peace, my Reverend George Walker Smith.
Thank you, Dolores. And now Robert A. Council will reading from the New Testament.
Good morning. I'm reading from Romans, the 8th chapter, verses 28 through 30. We know that God works all things together for good for the ones who love God, for those who are called according to his purpose. We know this because God knew them in advance, and he decided in advance that they would be conformed to the image of his Son. That way his Son would be the first of many brothers and sisters. Those who God decided in advance would be conformed to his Son, he also called. Those whom he called, he also made righteous. Those whom he made righteous, he also glorified. Thank you.
We also have fraternal acknowledgements. Kappa Alpha Psi President Paul Mark Dante T. Wyatt, Esquire.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be brief. As Paul Mark of the San Diego Alumni Chapter of Kappa Psi, I'd like to extend our deepest sympathies and condolences to the family of our beloved brother who's passed away. I actually first met Brother Walker Smith probably a month or two after I was initiated into the Kappa Psi Fraternity Incorporated Epsilon chapter here at Trinity State University. I met him at a Catfish Club meeting. I was told that if we went there, we might be able to get some funding for this youth program we were trying to run. And it was a bunch of about 3 or 4 college students. I was a neophyte, so I said, I wore letters everywhere I went back then. And we came in there and we were a little disorganized, weren't really well prepared. And Brother Walker Smith and Shirley Weber was here today, kind of shut us down real quick. And kind of cut us off and kind of, I won't say spanked us, but quickly sent us on our way. But we hung around, and towards the end, Brother Walker Smith came up to me. I didn't know he was a member of Kappa Psi Fraternity Incorporated prior to that. And he kind of took me aside, and he gave me some words of encouragement. And he told me that if I want to be a change agent in the city of San Diego, in this community, there's some things I need to know about how I go about preparing myself and how I go about presenting myself. And he shared some words with me that day that kind of lasted with me and stayed with me to this day. And whatever benefit I've been to the community, I think in a small part has been based on what those words he gave me that day back in 1997. So we have a resolution I'll present to the family, and once again, our deepest condolences. We know you loved our brother as much as we did, and we pray with you, we mourn with you. Thank you.
Just a slight correction. Our song is called I Don't Feel No Ways Tired. Our soloist is Felicia Daniel.
to leave me.
George is smiling now, isn't he? That was beautiful. Felicia Daniels, the soloist. I hope you're available for my service. Can I book you now? We have a second set of fraternal acknowledgments from Sigma Pi Phi Alpha Pi Boule, and that's from the Sire Archon Randy K. Jones, Esquire. Randy, good to see you.
What is the hour? Sire Archon, it is the hour of destiny. What great destiny calls us here? The destiny of a man and of all men. Then have we come this hour to celebrate the life of a fellow Archon who has been called to his eternal rest? It is for that we have come, Sire Archon. Will you call the name of him whose loss we mourn and bring to our remembrance his years with us? Sire Archon, we bring to remembrance the life of George Walker Smith, who contributed his life and learning to our fellowship and to this community. Archon Logos, please read for our inspiration the words of comfort from the wisdom of Solomon. Let us hear the message from the sacred breath of the souls of the just are in God's hands, and there shall no torment touch them. In the sight of the unwise, they seem to be dead. They depart from working as we keep. And they are going from us to utter destruction. But they are at peace. For though they be punished in the sight of men, yet have they sure hope of immortality. Because God has tested them and found them worthy in his. Like gold in a crucible, he put them to the proof and found them acceptable. Like an offering burnt coal upon the altar, and the Lord shall be their king forever and ever. Those who have put their trust in him shall understand that he is true, and the faithful shall save him in love. They are his chosen, in grace and mercy show him to lead from the ground. Archons of Alpha Pi Boule, it has been wisely said that the time and place of a man's life is the time and place of his body. But the meaning of a man's life is as eternal and significant as he, with all of him, wills to make it. These words are a key to the analysis of the life of all of us. Archon George Walker Smith demonstrated those standards of excellence we all cherish and which are a vital part of our heritage. He exemplified the highest principles of his profession. In so doing, he walked in the ways of other notables who have gone before him. At the same time, he made his own unique contribution to human well-being. The true measure of a man's life is determined not by the tangible things he produces, but by the intangible qualities he possesses and the impact he leaves upon his fellow man. It is measured not in length of years, but by the extent to which he recognized the abiding values of life, by his ability to distinguish between the true and the false, the superficial from the profound, and his ability to make courageous and responsible choices. Living in accordance with these ideas, Archon George Walker Walker Smith's life was significant and meaningful, and for this, we celebrate this movement. We know full well that there is nothing truer to life than death, and that in due course, each one of us will come to his moment of truth and destiny. As we bid farewell to our departed Archon, we have the assurance that his spirit rests in peace. Men of faith need have no fear of the eternal future, for the souls of the righteous are in the hands of God. Let us pray. O thou who art the Lord of life, from whom we come, in whom we live, and to whom we go, we praise your name for the life of our Father, George Walker Smith, and for the legacy of dedication and commitment to be bequeathed to those who follow in his train. Vouchsafe to us courage in the midst of difficulties and the ability to see light in the midst of darkness. Despite our sense of loss, may we ever be fully aware that life goes on and new challenges must be met, always with the undergirding of your eternal presence. In this spirit, O Lord of life, we all pray and say, Amen. Amen.
Thank you, gentlemen. We now have an expression of gratitude from Kalada Salam Alaji.
Good morning. Blessed are those that bear witness that death is not final. Love is the source of all life. As seeds and grass grow where there is land and water, where there is smoke, there is fire, clouds and rain are clearly linked. So is life that is deep-rooted in love, which sustains us all. The Smith family would like to thank each of you and to want you to know and how much they appreciate your acts of kindness that they extended to them during this very difficult time. It is greatly appreciated. The outpouring of love and warm remembrance. I am so nervous. This is amazing. The outpouring of love and warm remembrance by the Santa community is beyond and overwhelming for this family. They extend a deep thank you to Christ United Presbyterian Church, the Presbytery of San Diego, Dolores and Robert McNeely family, Jerry, Deneen, and Jack McGorry. They thank you for the thoughtfulness and your support. And I just want to say that I know Reverend George Walker Smith is on the other side. But I want him to know, and I want God to know, that we desperately need his help in our community today. Thank you very much.
We are now invited to, as we hear from Juanita Bell, the organist, to silently read the Lord's Prayer, and then we'll have some remembrances for George. Juanita Bell. Thank you, Juanita. With that, we're going to hear from a series of folks that will be remembering our friend and colleague and hero. I will say that every time I went to engage in a conversation or a convening or a meeting or a sermon with Reverend George Walker Smith, you knew you were going to hear wisdom. You knew you were going to hear about social justice. You knew you were going to hear about accountability. You knew you were going to see courage. But he also began every meeting, for those of you who have been with him, this will be no surprise, and he would always say consistently, and we're going to end on time today. Right? And I say that because we have a series of 11 speakers. We have 6 speakers, and then we'll have a soloist, and then 5 speakers. And I was advised that you each have no more than 3 minutes today. If you go over the 3 minutes, you just have to deal with George when you get to the pearly gates yourself. If you can stand looking him in the eye and explaining why you went over your time, then that's fine. But our first speaker today is the Reverend Michael Mudgett.
The pressure is on. You can begin the 3-minute clock right now. My name is Michael Mudgett. I am the Executive Presbyter of the Presbytery of San Diego, and on behalf of that presbytery, I would like to extend our warmest and sincere condolences to the family for your loss. It's truly an honor to be here and to participate in this celebration of the life of Reverend George Walker Smith. I read his autobiography last week, and Reverend Smith excelled as a leader in civic affairs and a member on the San Diego Board of Education. He was a strong leader, a courageous man, a champion of civil rights, and a crusader against racism, bigotry, and injustice of all kinds. There's one sphere of life he participated in that I'd like to highlight. That is the church. His love of God and his spiritual instincts to usher in the kingdom of God where justice reigns led him into the ministry. When he arrived in San Diego in 1956, he first served as pastor at Golden Hill Presbyterian Church, and then a few years later at this church, Christ United Presbyterian Church, until his retirement in 2000. Much of Reverend Smith's leadership was invested in this church and its people, and his legacy lives on in the fine people of Christ United Presbyterian Church, their good works, expressions of love, and their engagement with the community in business, civic education, and religious affairs. And Pastor Smith was a member of our presbytery, the Presbytery of San Diego, for nearly 64 years. At different times during this period, he led our presbytery as vice moderator, then moderator, and then chair of the governing council. He served on various committees within our presbytery, such as the Camp and Conference Committee, the Ecclesiastical Committee, Missions Committee, and others. He also served our synod. And these are the higher Presbyterian councils. He served as the moderator to the Synod of Southern California and Hawaii. And he served as commissioner to that synod for 3 years and on other standing committees of the synod. These are all positions of leadership. Yet I think his highest distinction is the legacy he leaves, the marks on lives that will be forever changed because of who he was. And who he was defined by his relationship with Jesus Christ, his Lord and his Savior. I want you, Anthony and Carolyn, to know that the legacy your father leaves is not limited to the spheres of politics, education, and civic affairs. He left a legacy to the members of this church, to the Presbytery of San Diego, to members of the Synod of Southern California and Hawaii and the Presbyterian Church USA. As people of faith, we thank God for your father. He was an outstanding pastor and a good friend to many, and a courageous civic and church leader. You can be very proud of your father.
Let us welcome Dennis Morgan and Gil Johnson, followed by Kathy Ramsey and Ed Quinn.
Good morning to the Smith family. I feel as if I'm a part of that family because as Carolyn and Tony knew that we would, Rev would hold court early in the morning. You know, had to be there at 7:30 and he wanted you on time, but he would be holding court. But out of the discussions that we had with Rev, there was always some kernel of wisdom and insight. And I think that's the thing that, you know, we look at the accomplishments that he has in his career, and not only has he affected San Diego on the local level, but on the national level also. I remember in Catfish Club, after a Catfish meeting, Reverend Smith had asked me to come into his office, and when I walked in, there was a jar of jelly beans on the table, black and white jelly beans. The significance of that was when the Texaco issues were going on, so Rev had a national reach to the extent that he was able to influence large corporations such as Texaco to do the right thing and to get people engaged and get people involved. The significance that he has done for San Diego, when we were in a situation where we're looking for someone to interface with or to get to dialogue with, and I couldn't reach that person, I'd come to Rev, and Rev would pick up the phone and make it happen. Yeah? He had the respect of the constituents to make that indeed happen. One of the other interesting stories, Reverend Smith said to me, and he said to me, make decisions. The only way you can correct a decision that you have made improperly is to have made a decision. So the analogy that he used to use was, Gil, never wear gray pants and a blue top because you get shot in both cheeks. Make sure that make sure that you took a position. Yeah? So I love them for that. We were both country boys, and my mom from Virginia would send Smithfield ham. Now, Rev knew that he shouldn't have eaten it with the salt, and so do I, but we would send once a year, and Mrs. Smith would make us a big old pot of beans with that country ham, and we would just go to town. We would have a good time. Good old country boys. You know, we would tell stories about growing up in the country and some of the things we went through. He was just a significant person to myself. When Gail and I first came to San Diego, we really did not know anyone. He embraced us. He took us in. He was a mentor. He helped in any way that he could. He will be missed dearly. I love the Smith family. Thank you for everything that you've done for San Diego and for the nation and for us personally.
Thank you, Gil. Our sincerest sympathy to the Smith family, and I want to say thank you for sharing him with the community at large. I had the good fortune of, at Reverend Smith's request, to serve with him on several boards. The Catfish Club Board, the McGill School Board, the Coalition for Equality, and United Negro College Fund Board. And this was about 33 years of being up close and listening to his advice. And he does give you a lot of advice. So he asked me to chair the McGill School Board. This is after I was on the board for like 2 years. He said, I want you to chair the board. And I think we all know when it comes to being punctual and things like this, how he operates. So he tells me, okay, the board is from 9 to 11 o'clock. So at 9 a.m., when we were all there and chit-chatting, he would do this to me, time to get going. You know, it's just signals, time to start. And then if things are moving too slow, I see he gives me this arm action. Move it on. I know that. So, and when he does this, he told me after, he said, you know what this means? Keep it short, sweet, and to the point. Got it. Then at 11 o'clock, close to 11 a.m., when the board should be about wrapping up, he would do this to me again. And I know what that means, motion to adjourn. And that's how he operates. So anyhow, I echo a lot of what Gil said, because the two of us meet with Rev very often, and Carlin knows we come there and we bug him for a lot of things. But he helped this community. He is our leader. He was our leader. And he has taught us how to serve the community. He really has. And we need to continue. We need to keep his legacy going. For example, I was involved in ownership in 2 engineering companies, Kercheval Engineers and Pacific 17. And the amount of business outreach that he did for us is unbelievable. I'll give a short story on San Diego Gas. You mentioned Texaco. San Diego Gas and Electric. We would be doing work for Southern California, Edison, but couldn't get work with San Diego Gas and Electric. So I went to Reverend Smith and I talked to him about it. He called the CEO and he said, okay, I set up a breakfast meeting. Let's go meet with the CEO of San Diego Gas and Electric. And we met with him, and Reverend Smith asked me to explain to the CEO what you did for SCE up in Orange County. So I told that CEO back then, this is in the 80s now. So he said, Reverend Smith just said to him, fix it. That's all he said, fix it. I went back to the office, and I got calls from SDG&E within an hour. And they fixed it. Thank you all. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Beautifully done, gentlemen. The 3-minute rule has been violated, but it has not been waived. It remains in effect, so I just remind that for the remainder of our speakers. Kathy Ramsey.
Good morning. You know, I was in the lead generation in this congregation, and Reverend Smith just didn't talk to us. He reached down another generation, and he spoke to our children. There are so many of them who came back today, and I said to one, oh, you remembered Reverend Smith? He said, no, he remembered, he knew us. So with all of Reverend Smith's students, children, our youth, just stand for quickly, because I got 3 minutes, y'all. Look at this, look at this. Amen. You know, it is really an honor and a privilege to stand before you and share sentiments about my former pastor, my mentor, my father figure, my friend, and my boss. The relationship I had with Reverend Smith evolved into a relationship with his entire family. I saw in this man, Reverend George Walker Smith, a charisma and a charm, the likes of which I had never seen before. In the office, and of course he wanted you to be prompt, we worked hard. We saw many, many people, dignitaries down to people off the streets. We shared tears and laughter, and Reverend Smith had the most skilled use of influence. He was the epitome of resourcefulness. I don't know anybody, because everybody who was anybody in San Diego knew Reverend Smith was the go-to man. They would pick his brain as they tried to seek his support and his endorsement, of course, in order that they may reach higher achievements. Here at our church vigilantly. He was always the first to arrive and stayed very, very late, and especially on those occasions when parents and children had the Easter egg hunts and sleepovers, he was here most all the night to make sure this place was safe and our children were okay. He never let a Sunday go by either without having something in the fellowship hall. And if nobody had signed the charts, he would take out of his pockets funds and send the staff. Go down there, and it was Gala Foods at the time, pick up some cookies and punch so we can get together in the fellowship hall. One of his favorite comedians was Moms Mabley, okay? And if you remember Moms Mabley, you knew she had the face only a mother could love. But she had a good spirit. Now, Reverend Smith had the nerve to call me his Mom Mabley. I didn't mind being like her, but I didn't want to look like her. He would ask me to serve as one of the performers during the UNCF, the United Negro College Fund fundraisers, and we did those annually. And I am a very shy person, but because Reverend Smith asked me, I said, okay. I did those. I hope I pleased him. Anyway, he kept asking me to do it year after year. Well, it was finally my turn. I felt like Reverend Smith, he could take a joke as well as give one. So at Christ United's 25th anniversary, the church anniversary, we celebrated at the convention center, and I joined the others as we roasted Reverend Smith. I told about how he came into the office early one Sunday morning, and he had little bits of paper stuck on his face. And one of the deacons was quite alarmed by it, and he said, "Reverend, what happened?" He said, "Well, you know, as I was shaving this morning, I was concentrating on my sermon so much until I cut my face." So he said, "Oh, okay, I see." So this nice, kind deacon said, "Well, Reverend, I suggest that in the future, you concentrate on your shaving and cut your sermons." Reverend Smith was a profound teacher. He taught from every sermon that he gave, every passerby that came into the office, every person. He had something, some wisdom to impart, as you've heard already. But he said that the two words that got him through life, when in the obituary you saw that he got that $100 scholarship for, you know, his efforts in being the top of his class and all, and he went to the school, and he went into the office, and he said, "Thank you." He was told then that he was the first to receive this scholarship, to come in and say thank you. So he always told us, that's what you do. Now, his sermons, presentations, and words of wisdom, the most important one to me was the Sunday that he had as a part of his sermon. He said, you should teach or speak so that those who hear will do. And that is how he lived his life. Thank you.
Now let me bring up Ed Quinn, followed by Taj N. Stewart and Dr. Bertha Pendleton.
Persuasive, empathetic, and inclusive. I'd like to talk to you about that today in my relationship with Reverend Smith. I moved here in 1986 from New Orleans to run Channel 10. And at that time, the first thing I did was look over the program schedule. I had to improve the profitability of the station. And what I found there was that the station was doing a number of telethons, St. Jude, March of Dimes, and the United Negro College Fund. That meant that on the weekends, we had to staff the studio with camera people, lighting people, floor directors, and we had to bring talent in. It was expensive, and we weren't getting any revenue back out of it. I also found out that we had this thing called the Catfish Club. And the Catfish Club, we were giving the studio away once a month for 2 hours, but even more important than that, we were turning our kitchen over to make catfish. Now think about that. I just came from New Orleans, and they're going to make catfish in San Diego. Well, I made those decisions. That's all gone. Short time later, I sat down with Reverend Smith. The meeting took about 20 minutes. And at the end of those 20 minutes, I not only recommitted to doing the United Negro College Fund, but I committed to the Catfish Club, adding more resources, talent, promotion, and so on. Persuasive. Empathetic. 10 years after I met George, my son Adam died. And I went into a very, very dark place. I was not a religious person. But I reached out to George, and he spent time with me. And you know, he didn't say to me, Adam's in a better place. He didn't say to me that God had a plan. He listened to me. He was empathetic to me, and he helped bring me out of that dark place. And the last word is inclusive. You know, to me, George didn't care if you were black or white or brown. He didn't care if you were Presbyterian or Catholic or Jewish or Muslim. He didn't care if you were Irish or Polish or Russian. What he cared about was dialogue, respectful dialogue. And that's what the Catfish Club did. And I'm proud to be part of that. Look how much we miss that today. Look where our country is today. We need more Reverend George Walker Smiths. We need that today. And thank you, Carolyn, for inviting me and letting me speak today. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Taj Stewart, and I am the oldest of the grandchildren. We are here today to celebrate Reverend George Walker Smith, but we, the grandchildren, call him Big Granny. Yes, it was Big Granny, and his wife Irene was Little Granny, and that was a name that I gave both of them when I was a little girl. I have to say my fondest memory of Big Granny was actually back in the Golden Hills Church. When Big Granny was done for the day, We'd actually walk down the street. There was a convenience store on the same side of the street. I'd go in there, I'd get a popsicle, which at that time was 25 cents. He'd talk to the clerk, because he knew everyone in San Diego, all the convenience stores, all the newspaper stands, he knew everybody. So he'd go in there and do what he do. We'd go home from there, he'd actually change his clothes, and then we'd go downstairs. For us, downstairs of their house was the playroom for us, grandchildren. We'd watch the same TV show Monday through Friday. Now, he rarely stayed awake that whole time. But for the two of us, because the rest of the grandchildren weren't here yet, that was just our time, and it was just the time that I just will always remember. Many of you may not know, but Big Granny was actually a great cook. He actually cooked just as good as Little Granny. What I remember on Fridays after catfish, he would actually come home with his own catfish. He'd bust open one of those old big brown paper bags on the front lawn. He'd scale the fish, gut the fish, hose it off with the regular hose in the front, and go inside and use a cast iron skillet and fry the fish up. And all afternoon, that's what we'd be snacking on is fish in our house. It was really good eating. Growing up as a youth of the church, all youth, we were very fortunate to be able to attend a lot of the different galas at that time that were going on in San Diego. And one that stands out for me, or the event, is actually the UNCF Telethon. As a youth of the church, we were actually able to go and be kind of behind the scenes. I remember going there and just being nosy, running around the studio, things like that. But, at some point, Little Granny would say it was too late, so we had to go home. But being able to then turn on the TV and watch it continue and see all the familiar faces, the faces from the church, and just faces that we saw at Catfish Club, it was just amazing, because everybody was there for a purpose. They were trying to make a difference. And then yet at the forefront of it all was Big Granny. I think about Big Granny dressing up as Santa Claus. I mean, we had at that time a real black Santa, belly and all. And then I think about the Catfish Club. At that time, us grandkids, we actually had to stay in the kitchen. But the door swings in the kitchen, so we crack it open just a little bit so we can kind of peek and see who's coming in. And it was hilarious, because you'd see, everyone coming in their business attire, everyone suited and booted. But they're coming there to eat fried fish, green beans, potato salad, and punch. And it was red punch at that time at that. But those are things that I remember, because it was just, the names, the people that came through at Catfish. I mean, you didn't know it then, but it was everybody. I mean, we were amongst really black excellence at that time. And Catfish wasn't just black. I mean, it was everybody, And that it was just amazing. When Big Granny retired, you would think that would have slowed him down a bit. But we all know that did not. He kept that telephone in arm's reach, and he was always calling people day after day. He stayed abreast of what was going on locally and afar. But most of all he really wanted to know was what was going on with his grandkids. I'd come into the house and he'd say, "Taj, have you talked to Shani today? Or where's Noni at?" Just about every time I'd go over to his house, the first thing he'd say is, "I'd do anything for you, just let me know." There are so many things that we are going to miss. We are going to miss him asking, "Where's his pouch?" Because he always kept his pouch tucked into his waistband. Or him sitting in the living room and there's a conversation going on and he's acting as if he can't hear, but then yet as soon as a person would leave out the room, he chimes in and he really heard everything. That's what it boils down to. Sam, his great-grandson, will miss him sliding him that $5 bill. And it wasn't the monetary value to that $5 bill. What it was is it gave him that moment to be able to hug Sam and tell him how proud he was of him. Noni will miss the excitement that Big Granny had every time she'd walk into the room. Shani will miss that confidence, the comfort, the security that Big Granny's voice alone provided her. He always made you feel like everything was going to be okay. And Wayman will miss the wisdom that Big Granny shared and continue to share up to 91 years old. He always, always, always was sharing his wisdom. And for me, Big Granny taught me, when I went away to school, he sat down with me in the living room and he taught me about love, the different types of love, the agape love. And for me, that just, you know, to hear a man teach you about love, please. One of the most touching things that I think all of us grandchildren will remember is the fact that Big Granny actually baptized all of us, including his great-grandchild. Those blessings that he bestowed upon us will continue to protect us forever. We will miss our Big Granny, but it gives us all comfort in knowing that he is with God, Little Granny, Dimaj, Joyce, and his many other family members and friends here of the church that are all no longer with us. Thank you.
Good morning, San Diego. George isn't here. We don't see him. But somehow we feel his presence. So it's like he's here. And I can't imagine that George would have all these people and all of his friends here today and not be here. So he's here. After graduating from high school in 1950, I was among about 600 other students who headed for East Tennessee to a small Presbyterian school called Knoxville College. Our trunks, our couple of pieces of clothing, this exciting trip, because most have never been more than 200 miles from home. I think I had won a trip, an essay contest the year before that allowed me to go to Washington, D.C. So I had a little taste of getting out of town. We went on this exciting trip going off to school. We would be met by the upperclassmen who came to check us out, see what we were like, and to show their superiority. Among them, a scrawny little kid from the Millersburg, South Alabama area of the city, of the country, called George Smith. Now, almost every kid in school attended school on a school scholarship. George, I understood, had $100. I had gotten $250. Why the difference? I don't know. His job was to toll the bells. He would toll the bell to tell us when to go to class, when class was over, when you would need to go to a special event, a concert, and when you would need to be in your dorm. So in many ways, George had a lot of power because he was controlling our comings and goings. He also had a schedule of his own. He went to chemistry class, took German, went to science lab, played basketball a little bit, and finally off to Pittsburgh to seminary studies. Our paths didn't cross again until 1957. I had been recruited to come to teach school here in San Diego. Now, neither Oscar nor I knew anybody in San Diego. And of course, we had lots of money. So Oscar headed west on Greyhound bus. But we knew we'd be welcomed by the Presbyterian Church. Oscar called me back and he said, I went to this church called Golden Hill Presbyterian Church. And I met the minister, and his name is George Smith. He described him to me, and I said, oh no, couldn't be the right one, because the George I know is skinny. Well, we now know it was the same George. The same one from South Alabama, who grew up to be a force in this town, this country. I came a little later in my rich self by Southern Pacific Railway. Didn't have a berth. But George Smith was one of those persons who welcomed us all, no matter who we were. He baptized our children. You saw so many of them stand up a few minutes ago. And they went on, continued to be part of his flock, and they've done well. I wonder sometimes, though, those kids were healthy babies. How in the world did Jordan manage to pick them up and baptize them all the way through? But he kept them together. He became an important voice, as you have heard from many, and we all love him for it. He was an important voice that helped to make that Catfish Club grow to be the forum that it is still today, I understand. Well, we came to San Diego. We didn't have a car. In fact, I didn't know how to drive. That makes sense. Don't have a car, don't know how to drive. Unlike Mabel Wigfall, whose dad had a truck that allowed her to learn how to drive in Mississippi. But in Gaston, Alabama, on gravel roads and the bus within probably a block, you didn't really need to worry about. But anyway, once I came to San Diego, had to learn to drive in order to get around, because George and his flock couldn't take me everywhere. So I went driving one day up in Emerald Hills. That would be my big excursion, only to run into a fire hydrant. Hit water going everywhere, rocks going everywhere. What am I going to do? Oscar hasn't come home from work. Call Rev, he'll know what to do. So I called him and I said, oh, I'm crying and carrying on. I've had this big problem, so what am I going to do? Well, after he soothed you a while, he said, well, I know what we can do. We'll just remind Oscar of how many ditches he ran into down in Louisiana. Well, that seemed to work. He had a demanding schedule, but he was a minister, first of all, of a mission church that never turned anybody down. A mission church where your problem was never too small for him to listen to and try to help you out. A mission church that had food for anyone who was hungry, or a few coins for those who may have needed something to tide over. This was the kind of person that we knew. And this is the kind of person that we still are honoring today. If he were here today to see this crowd, as he told me about a year and a half ago when I went back to see him, and he said, you know, Bertha, what are you going to do? What are you guys going to do about education? I tell you what, why don't you and Dorothy and Shirley Weber and Tom Goodman and some of those guys, why don't you guys get together and come up with a plan to do something about our children? I'll help you. He never gave up. And you know what? He's still helping us. His influence will continue. And so that's why we honor him today, our George Walker Smith.
the cause of all my joy. He fills me with his love, and everything I need, he sends it down from up above. Hallelujah. God has smiled on me. He has set me free. God has smiled on me. He's been good to me. A lamp unto my path is he. Without him, I would fall. I don't know what it means to you, oh, but to me, he's my all and all. Thank you, Jesus. God has smiled on me. He has set me free. God has smiled on me. He's been good. He's been good. He's been good. He's been good. My God has been good. He's been so good. He feeds me when I'm hungry, and he clothes me when I'm naked. He's a friend when I am friendless. He is a shelter when I'm in danger. My God has been good. He's been so good. He's been 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 good to me.
That was beautiful. The name of that song was God Has Smiled on Me. And Pastor Bird, don't you agree that God would smile on these next 5 speakers if they could try and keep it to 3 minutes? I'm trying, y'all. I'm trying. I'm trying, George. I'd like to bring up Dr. Thomas Goodman, Dr. Robert Brown, Dr. Leon Kelly, Norma Cazares, and Dr. Dorothy Smith.
There you are. Everyone, I'm not Thomas Goodman. I'm Bob Brown. I spent a lot of time with Reverend Smith over the last few years. He meant so much to me. It brought me comfort. You know, his just being able to spend time with him. The wisdom, it was worth it all. He was my man. He did things for me basically saved me from myself. Education was so important to him. So on behalf, and he would often come up to University of California, San Diego, where I work, and want to see what was going on up there, how we were going to do better. He came up a couple of times over the last month or so, I think, and spoke to a couple of the vice chancellors. So on behalf of the entire University of California, San Diego family, it is with great sadness that we are today grieving the passing of Reverend George Walker Smith. The entire Triton family send our deepest condolences to Reverend George Walker Smith's family and the many people and organizations he dedicated his life of service to. The University of California, San Diego community mourns with you and celebrates the extraordinary life of this remarkable man who devoted his life to helping all of us appreciate our common positives. His belief that a community should come together to talk and understand each other, to address differences, is the glue that held this city together in some of its most challenging times. You see, we didn't have the riots here in San Diego when they had them up in Los Angeles, primarily because of Reverend Smith. He was honored for that, believe it or not, this year at a function at Christmas time by George Mitrovich. So with that, and on behalf of our entire family, especially our Chancellor, Mr. Pradeep Khosla, we want to thank him, and I personally thank him. I just can't leave here without sharing one thing with you. When my mother died, I didn't tell him, I just told him she had died. He and I never, he didn't know where I was from. I came here in '70 to play football at USC. On the day of my mother's funeral, my uncle steps into the church and says, they call me Little Bob in Florida. He said, Little Bob. He said, there's a Reverend George Walker Smith on the phone waiting for you. He said he will be there and stay there with the phone off the hook until this is over. I was locked in after that. You cannot love a person and believe in them after someone does that for you. So to all of you, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm going to apologize in advance for reading my remarks because I've seen Reverend Smith leave a program when it was too long or the remarks were too long. I know he's watching us now, and I don't want him to leave while I'm speaking. I met Reverend Smith in 1964 when I was invited to sing the Messiah with the Golden Hill Chancel Choir. At that time, I was an intern at the Naval Hospital. That introduced me to the choir. I continued to sing with the choir when I had Sundays off, which was not often. I went to sea for a year. I returned, and the church had a new choir director. I joined again. By default, I found myself becoming the assistant choir director, and after a few months, I was elevated to director. I held this position until 1968. The Navy reassigned me to another hospital. A couple of years later, I returned, and lo and behold, they gave me the reins again to be the choir director. That's when I really got to know Reverend Smith well. We became close friends. At weekly rehearsals, we talked about the church and its mission. It was important to plan the music and make it relative to the entire service. We talked about the growth of the black community in San Diego, politics, business, and always family. Reverend Smith was an awesome role model for me, my children, and all the children at Golden Hill / Christ United. He encouraged excellence in academics that led to just about all of our children going to college, which ultimately led to great jobs, entrepreneurial endeavors. He took great interest in the children's lives and encouraged them to be successful. He often spoke of his hope that one of my children would go into the ministry. Well, that didn't happen. However, they all did finish college. Reverend Smith was a great community leader. He knew everyone. Because of that, I had the opportunity to meet many elected officials, CEOs, prominent business people in the community. Election time was especially exciting at our church as the candidates gathered around to receive his blessing. Reverend Smith was largely responsible for my joining Sigma Pi Phi fraternity, an organization I'm very proud of, and have been a member for 46 years. And of course, you heard from them earlier. Reverend Smith was a force in the political arena of San Diego. In the state of California, community changes, especially advancements, almost always went through him for approval. Businesses also knew of Reverend Smith's influence. One year, the San Diego Chargers selected Golden Hill to premiere their marketing video promo for the upcoming season. Reverend Smith wanted special music for this event. We took the opportunity to introduce our first gospel number. It was Reverend Smith's chance to sound like a Baptist minister as we backed up his prayer with an upbeat sound. With Reverend Smith as pastor of Golden Hill, later Christ United, our church was like no other, certainly not like any other Presbyterian church. Music has always been a big part of our church's uniqueness. Our choir came to be known for its versatility. Reverend Smith was always supportive and appreciative of what we did musically and was proud that our repertoire included anthems, spirituals, gospel. He was especially proud our choir performed many cantatas like the Messiah, Seven Last Words, Forays, Requiem, and many others. Even after retirement, he continues to support our choir and the youth of our church. Even though his illness had compromised his ability to get around, he was always very sharp mentally. Whenever I had the opportunity to see him, he'd take the time to ask about my family and always wanted to know about our children, what they were doing, and their accomplishments. Reverend Smith's impact on our church and its congregation will always be felt. I consider it among the greatest honors of my life to have known, worked with, and called him a dear friend. My heart and prayers go out to Reverend Smith's beloved family. Rest assured, he's sitting in the bosom of Jesus, watching over you as he always has. God bless you all.
Buenos dias. Good morning, too. Good morning. Thank you all. I really am honored to be here with all of you today, and I especially want to thank Carolyn for inviting me to be here with you today to share a few words. And my name is Norma Cázares, and I've had the pleasure of knowing arguing, but mostly laughing with the Rev. I called him the Rev, and it wasn't until I introduced him to someone and I said, "This is the Rev." And he goes, "Okay, I like that one." So he's always been Rev to me. So I worked alongside the Rev on a number of community endeavors over the years, but his favorite project, and someone else said that his passion was for education, okay? And in my opinion, his favorite project was the Chancellor William McGill School of Success. It's the little school with a big heart. It's located right next door. We lease from the church, and I've been privileged to be on the board of directors of McGill School for the past 12 years. And for the last few as president. I still remember when he connived me. We all know what that's like, right, with him? Because I'm sure he connived a few of you out here. When he connived me into joining the board, you know, as you also know, you can't say no to the Rev, right? You can't say no to him. Well, I didn't say no, and it's been 12 years. Up until about 3 years ago when he resigned, the Rev was on the board of directors since his founding of the San Diego Innovative Preschool Program around 1989. And a few years later, it transitioned to become what it is today, which is the Chancellor William McGill School of Success, and it was named after UCSD's chancellor. That was very supportive of the project. UCSD is represented over here on this side. Starting as a preschool, it later opened as a third grade charter school as an arm of the San Diego Unified School District, and I saw some members here. President Evans, I see, and yes, I see you all. Thank you for being here. And the school's first principal was Deborah Huggins, who was with McGill for many, many years. I don't know if she's here today. There she is. I think it was like 9 or 10 years, right, Ms. Huggins? She was a principal. Reverend Smith and other founders, including Dr. Dorothy Smith over here, decided that the primary focus of the school was to conduct programs that improve and or contribute to the educational achievement of students with a particular emphasis on inner city children from diverse and low-income backgrounds. With this focus, the school was designed to improve school performance and reduce the school dropout rate among ethnically diverse inner city children from low-income families through early childhood education and family intervention. The program was based on the premise that children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are not predestined for academic failure, and that with early and appropriate interventions with children and their families, such children could do as well or better than their counterparts throughout their school years. That sounds like the Rev, right? He believed that. So with the Reverend's enthusiasm, dedication, and love for McGill, he inspired the board of directors and all the school to continue innovating and growing. Many programs have been initiated in the school, including Dr. Sonora Baker's very successful men's reading, which will be celebrating its 20th anniversary at McGill this year. I have no doubt that there are many of you gentlemen out there with a little arm twisting from the Rev, and you were invited to read to our students so that they can see that they too can aspire to be successful members of society. Today, McGill is certified as a 501c3 and has grown to a K5 with a wonderful music program and student leadership program. And last month, thank you, San Diego Unified, we were granted yet another charter renewal, so we'll be going on for another 5 years at least, if not more. And that was also many thanks to the efforts of our current principal, Norma Sandoval. As a matter of fact, is Miss Sandoval in here? If she's not, she's out corralling the kids so you guys don't run over them. She's not in here, okay. She's out corralling the kids. I'd like some of the board, I know I see some of the board members, please stand so you can be recognized very quickly. Come on, Ed. Dr. Brown, Dennis over here. Yeah, they're over here. We also have our past principals, Ms. Fuentes and Ponce here as well. Thank you for being here. On behalf of the directors and McGill School community, we offer our condolences to the family of Reverend Smith, as well as to the larger community who will undoubtedly fill a huge void. To our beloved Rev, soar, my friend. Your much revered job on earth is done. Now go raise some heck in the heavens. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. Reverend Dr. George Walker Smith, my dear friend, often said to me, Dorothy, my aim is that when I leave this world, I will leave it in a better state than when I found it. Life's most persistent question, said Martin Luther King Jr., is what are you doing for others? George Walker Smith did more for others than anyone I have ever known. He believed that serving Christ is not confined to the walls of a church, but that he should go into all of the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Reverend Smith came to his office early and worked late. People streamed into his office. They came for spiritual guidance, counseling, food, shelter, referrals to jobs, help to get appointments to commissions and boards, political endorsements. People in other cities across the United States knew Reverend Smith's phone number. One of them, a Long Beach City College president, gave me a scribbled note saying, call Reverend Smith. He will help you to get established in San Diego. Reverend Smith's life was not easy. He struggled to become the first Black person to assume public office in San Diego, defeating a 72-year-old blind white man by only 411 votes. But he became the chief school board member in the United States as president of the National School Boards Association. He was born to sharecropping parents in an Alabama town that provided public schools for Blacks only to the 9th grade. But he fought for the best education for all children, founded a school, the School of Success, on the belief that race, residence, and socioeconomic condition do not predestine children to underachievement. And he raised millions of dollars to benefit historically Black colleges and universities. Reverend Smith experienced discrimination based on his race, but he opened his mind, his heart, and a helping hand to persons of every description. His parents were denied political rights, but he created a forum that taught people about issues and methods of exercising their rights of citizenship. Reverend Smith saw that in San Diego, students were getting a separate and unequal education, and he worked to promote integration and to create a better education for all students. He was at first rejected for membership in the San Diego Kiwanis Club, but he went on to create numerous organizations that continue to thrive and do good throughout our community. Reverend Smith never had much money. Christ United did not sponsor pastors' anniversaries or give him luxury cars or even great suits. But he was the most generous and powerful person I have ever known. His anchors were God and his life's mate, Elizabeth Irene Hightower Smith. She was the wind beneath his wings. Quiet and unassuming, Mrs. Smith was always at church before anyone else. She woke early on Sunday morning, tended to her own children, and then drove sometimes for hours to pick up other children and bring them to Sunday school. She seldom sat down at a church service. One day, as she was busy placing the church bulletins she had personally typed, she said to me, "My role is to do everything I can to help George so that he does not have to worry about anything." Ever since Mrs. Smith passed in 2009, Reverend Smith had been unsettled. Each time we talked, he shed tears of longing for his wonderful Irene. Now, he doesn't have to worry about anything. He and Irene are together again. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have fought a good fight. You have finished your course. You have kept the faith. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Rest well, my beloved friend, until we meet again.
Good afternoon. I first want to say thank you, Carolyn and Anthony, for allowing me to celebrate with your dad at this amazing celebration. I first met Reverend Smith in 1968. I went to Roosevelt Junior High School, and I was a part of the first force busing program. I was 14 years old. They found a way to try to send most of the African-American kids back to the community, but thanks to Reverend George Walker Smith, he made it happen where I could stay there and get my education. He certainly made it a wonderful world. So I dedicate this to him. Cut it. I'll do a cappella. I see trees are green and red roses too, and I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day and the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, they're also on the faces of the people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? But all they're really saying is, I love you. I hear babies cry as I watch them grow, but they'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh yes, yes, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much.
Floyd, that was beautiful. Before I bring up our final speaker for the eulogy, I just want to share with the Smith family, particularly the grandchildren, George's life is just so extraordinary. Not everything he did that was extraordinary could fit in his obituary. And I want to share one of them. I arrived in San Diego more than 25 years ago at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And it's hard to imagine now what it was like then, but those of you that remember, I see my friend Dr. Rodney and Dr. Leon, who served patients during that time. Persons with HIV/AIDS were not exactly welcomed by society at the height of the epidemic, particularly your folks of color. And this was a group of patients at that epidemic during that time, and I arrived from Philadelphia to San Diego as director of the health department at the height of that epidemic. This was a group of patients that were too often ostracized and stigmatized and shunned and marginalized by much of society and even much of the faith community. There were a lot of churches around this country who did not welcome folks with the disease into their ministry. Not Reverend George Walker Smith. He was among the first ministers of any prominence, not only here in San Diego, but across the country, to extend a welcoming love of embrace to patients and families dealing with that disease. And that just struck me as someone who, when he talked about civil rights and justice for all, he truly meant for all. He meant everybody. So I just wanted to pass that along, that was my first encounter with Reverend Smith, not only welcoming me, but whenever I asked him to speak up on behalf of folks with the epidemic, and in that epidemic with the disease, either before the County Board of Supervisors or anywhere else, he was only too glad to respond and be supportive in his loving and thoughtful and courageous way. With that, join me in welcoming Dr. Constance Carroll, Chancellor of the San Diego Community College District, for our eulogy.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This has been a remarkable morning to celebrate the life and memory of a remarkable individual, Reverend George Walker Smith. To his family, we extend full sympathy and love to all of the community supporters who are here and his other friends. And I'm very grateful to you, Carolyn, for giving me the opportunity and inviting me to share remarks. My remarks are in the form of a eulogy. And some of you know my background is in ancient Greek, so I cannot resist the fact that the word eulogy is a Greek word. The eu means well, and the logos means speech or word. The important thing about a eulogy is to put things in context, in a positive context. And that's something that is easy for me to do because Reverend George Walker Smith is someone whom I admired deeply and loved more than I could ever describe. Great men are rare, but when we encounter them, we recognize them right away. And their impact on our lives and our communities and other contexts, in this case, the state, the nation, is profound and enduring. Sometimes great men are heroes as well, and that is when, in addition to providing enlightened leadership, they also put themselves at risk. And that is who Reverend George Walker Smith was. He was both a great man and a hero for our time. Reverend Smith seasoned his greatness and heroism with other characteristics, especially humor. On Sunday, May the 19th, 2002, when I was still president of Mesa College, I attended a commencement ceremony at San Diego State University. And the reason Reverend George Walker Smith received the degree, the honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters. And here's what the university said about Reverend Smith. The Reverend George Walker Smith is one of San Diego's most effective community leaders, having participated in dozens of civic activities over the last half-century. As the pastor of an active and diversified ministry for 44 years, Reverend Smith has built bridges of understanding across cultures and ethnic backgrounds. Paramount among his concerns has been the city's youth. He has been a tireless advocate for quality education and for all children, and has helped create a voice for those who have been left behind. And here's what Reverend Smith said: "I feel just like a stack of pancakes in too much syrup." George Walker Smith began his life, as you know, in Hayneville, Alabama, one of the late Will and Amanda Smith's 11 children. Here he learned firsthand, as you've heard from some of the other speakers, what it was like to be a black person in the South, especially to be a black child, that public education ended at the 9th grade, for example. And so Reverend Smith's parents sent him to boarding school to complete his secondary education, following which he went to Knoxville College and majored in, I believe, in chemistry, which was shocking, to me, due respects to everyone who likes science. Later, after earning a Master of Divinity degree in 1956 from the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, Reverend Smith became an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, which was his great love. In the same year, he moved to San Diego with his beloved wife, Irene, and founded the Golden Hill United Presbyterian Church, and later Christ United Presbyterian Church, where we are all now celebrating his life. The story of his early years is well known, especially the fact that he was not universally accepted as pastor because of his race. Nevertheless, he was a trailblazer. He had tenacity and strength and a tremendous belief in the future, and he prevailed to make the church a revered and respected house of worship as it is today. Reverend Smith and Irene Smith raised a beautiful family in San Diego. They were intensely proud of their children, of Carolyn, of Joyce, of Anthony, two of whom are here today. Later, there were grandchildren who spoke beautifully, and others who benefited from the nurturing grace of the Smith family. He introduced all of them to his leadership activities and involved them in civic life, even peering out from the Catfish Club doors. Despite some tragic losses within the family, their own love for each other and strength enabled them to move forward. As a trailblazer, Reverend Smith also took on major civic responsibilities. In his book, which I commend to you and recommend, Reverend George Walker Smith, The Conscience of the Community, Reverend Smith talks very candidly about his introduction into civic life in San Diego. And I'd like to share with you, in his words, his opinion. Once I got the church established, I became more interested in how I could affect the community. As I got to know these men who ran the town, they did not shut me out of making contributions. I was one of the most educated Negroes in town, and they did not deny my input. Usually I would meet with another black leader and go with him to a meeting with one of these white people and bring a request or explain a situation that needed to be addressed. We would say our piece, and then one of them would say to us, "Okay, now get the hell out of here." And I didn't say that, Reverend Smith wrote that. We had to trust them to enact the changes, and many times they did. But in time, these men saw the advantage of having me in a more prominent role in the community. Within a few years, I was on several boards as the black board member. I didn't care why. It brought me to seats of power that I would never have occupied and expanded my sphere of influence. In the process, I earned their respect. As an emerging civic leader, Reverend Smith was part of seeking and achieving great change in San Diego, a city that was, to the surprise of many newcomers today, segregated racially at the time. He was active in the desegregation of restaurants in San Diego, including the Grant Grill, and he worked hard to help eliminate the redlining that was pervasive in the real estate industry. He was a forthright and eloquent champion of these causes. Reverend Smith was San Diego's first African American elected to public office when he successfully joined the San Diego School Board of Education in 1963, where he quickly demonstrated his devotion to the cause of quality education for children and even helped with the creation of a new organization in post-secondary education in San Diego, and that was the San Diego Community College District. Reverend Smith was committed to public education and believed it was inherently a democratic institution. Let me share with you what he had to say about that. The public school system is the last real democratic institution in the country. The school system of this nation must be democratic. Private schools can pick and choose who gets enrolled, but in public schools, students are enrolled because of where they are and what their needs are. When I was first on the San Diego Board of Education, there was a bitter debate over whether or not to accept federal money. Many fought against it, citing discomfort with the fact that outsiders could dictate policy to the local schools. I supported it because those policies were centered on inclusion and on the outlawing of discrimination. When we voted to accept federal money, it came rolling into our schools and accomplished things that the San Diego tax base alone could never have accomplished. At the same time, Reverend Smith was opposed to outside interests when they attempted to intrude into and influence the school board's policies and hiring decisions. You can read more about that in his book. And let me just say, in his book, he takes no prisoners. So it's quite a memoir. George Walker Smith was also a force beyond San Diego, as you have heard, and beyond California. He served on and became president of the Council of the Great City Schools. He was also elected in 1976 as president of the National School Boards Association, a huge honor. He served on the National Advisory Commission for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and also the White House Conference on Children and Youth. The honors he has received are well-deserved and too many to mention. And in San Diego, many of us knew him best as the founder and presiding presence for the Catfish Club, which was a unique forum for candid dialogue about important civic issues, and also, of course, for consuming a delicious catfish lunch cooked by his wife, Irene. When I moved to San Diego in 1993 and began to learn the contours of my new city, I asked people what I should do to become connected. And they said that the Friday Catfish Club was a must-do. I was also told that if I met no one else in the city, the Reverend George Walker Smith was a must-meet. And I did both, and my own civic involvement was shaped by these connections. Later, when the Catfish Club moved from the church to Channel 10 Studios, and then again moved to the Hall of Champions, I was proud to serve on the board and assist Reverend Smith in any way that I could. And of course, there was just one answer and one word one could ever use in response to Reverend Smith when he asked you to do something, and that word was yes. Very good. You all get an A+. When Reverend Smith published his memoir that I mentioned, I was honored when he gave me immediately the galley proofs to review. I then spent the entire weekend going line by line through the galley proofs. I was proud in the end, exhausted by the end of Sunday night, that I had done, I thought, a good job of editing and improving the work. I then very proudly brought my work when I met with Reverend Smith on Monday morning and gave him the galley proofs back with all of the red lines and checks and additions and notations. And he said, "What's all this?" And I said, "Well, Reverend, I proofed your book and made edits." And he said, "I didn't ask you to do any of that. I just asked you to read it and tell me if you liked it." Or rather, I think he actually said, "And tell me that you liked it." And I did like it. It reads as he spoke. It was a candid account of his life, especially in San Diego. His observations about many people, not all of them complimentary, and his belief in that goodwill and strength and dialogue would help solve civic problems. Reverend Smith spoke and wrote fondly about the Catfish Club, and let me share what he said about it. The Catfish Club has unquestionably had a positive impact on San Diego. It's the only place of its kind where people of all backgrounds can come and feel comfortable. It's on the cutting edge of discussion about what is good and what is bad in the community. Its motto is simple: come, be fed, be satisfied, and then be challenged. And it was a wonderful, wonderful organization which needs, I hope, to be revitalized in the future so that it can once again become a must-do for all of us. At the end of the Catfish Club, before the door prizes, he would always ask anyone who was new to the Catfish Club to raise their hand. And after a while, I would tell people, "Don't do it, don't do it, be careful." But people were excited and they would raise their hand. And he would say, "Good, welcome to the Catfish Club. This means that you haven't read my book." Or others would say, "You haven't read Reverend Smith's book. You can go over there and purchase a copy." So that was the reward. Reverend Smith was known for pulling people together, especially in the aftermath of the Rodney King beating. Where many cities and communities experienced riots and violence, San Diego did not, due in large measure to the coalition that Reverend Smith pulled together personally to discuss San Diego's multicultural soul and its multiracial challenges. No one else could have done this, and he did so through his strength of belief and through his legendary persistence. Here's what he said about making change through seeking political office. When you run for political office, you find out who your true friends are. You find out who is genuine and who is not. Some people can really hurt you when you put yourself out there for votes, but you can't let that get you down. You have to get over the hurt and not take it personally. The greater factor is not in being fallen, but in getting up and going on. He had similar advice for me when I talked with him about seeking the chancellor's position in my district. Much of what I am today and who I am was shaped by the example and mentoring of George Walker Smith. And though I was not a member of his family, I felt like one of the strays that he had taken in. I'm sure many of us here are in that category. And I know that many of you here have benefited from his wisdom, his advice, his love and nurturing, as he helped you find your own inner courage. And now we have lost our great man. We've lost our hero, our leader, our mentor, our best friend, and the conscience of our community. However, through his legacy and through his great faith and love, he will always be with us because we are the persons we are because he helped us reach our potential. In the words of St. Paul in his second letter to Timothy, which could easily have been spoken by Reverend Smith himself, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. And that is now our mandate to carry on with the great vision of Reverend George Walker Smith as we rededicate ourselves to ensuring that San Diego moves forward as a great and beloved community. Thank you.
Let us stand to receive the benediction. A reminder as I lead the family out, please follow the family and make two rights. Once you're on the sidewalk, a right, and another right into the fellowship hall. And once in the fellowship hall, at some point during the fellowship time, the McGill School Choir will sing for us. Let us receive the benediction. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of God's Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, and the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit remain with you always. Alleluia. Amen. Amen.
Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. When Jesus was. When Jesus was. When Jesus was. He washed my sins away. Oh, happy day. Oh, what a happy day. Oh, happy day. Oh, happy day. When Jesus was. 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 He washed my sins away. Oh, what a happy day. He taught me how. He taught me how. My Lord, dear God, yeah. Shout when I get to heaven. He washed my sins